What's up guys, welcome back to my channel Anime Fiction. I'm back with a new episode of What If Naruto Teleported to Another World Part 14. And if you did enjoy the video, give this video a like for the next part. And if you're new to my channel and like my content, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more crossover fictions with a twist. Now let's begin this new video.
The Forgotten Ninja's Way, Chapter 16. Erza Scarlet did not believe in being overconfident in one's own abilities. She knew from experience that when someone had that much faith in their abilities, they became arrogant and stopped caring about getting stronger. She knew because she had fought so many wizards and bandits over the years that it was almost expected for some of them to begin monologuing and treating her arrogantly. As a result, she was always striving to exercise as much as she could and become stronger than she was before. She knew that as long as you wanted to move forward and develop stronger, there would be no boundaries to your progress. Even while Erza never boasted about her abilities, she was well aware that she wasn't a slouch when it came to fighting. Even when that woman wasn't causing trouble, she and Mira had stuff to quarrel about. Naruto frequently invited her to sparring sessions, and the two of them had gathered a lot of experience from the training. And she knew she was a decent fighter because Natsu and Gray appeared to shun her whenever she tried to join in on their bouts. Only Gildarts and possibly Laxus would be fully outclassed in combat by the people Erza knew. So, when she watched the ostensibly chakra-wielding woman expertly evade Natuto's sword blows after throwing Erza across the clearing, Erza couldn't help but assume she was at a fighting disadvantage. In terms of power and fighting abilities, this woman could have been on par with Gildarts. She flowed like a calm wind around her and Naruto's sword strokes with such excellent footwork that Erza couldn't concentrate on the fight without focused on the woman's next move. Even though she hadn't directly attacked them, the damage her fists had made to the surrounding area proved that her slender arms held a lot of force. No, it wasn't that she hadn't landed a blow. It was more that she was using near calls to terrify them. Naruto was attempting to use non-lethal force to incapacitate the woman. He continued to put magic into his two blades, activating their fire and wind elemental powers and swiping at the blonde opponent. She inhaled deeply and sank into a tight defensive stance before his blades could enter her personal space. The woman's torso emitted a faint glow, and her feet pounded lightly on the earth. Erza forced herself up, her gaze fixed on the conflict and waiting for an opportunity to grab the woman. The re-equipped Mage watched as the mystery woman used her incredible footwork to evade her friend's swords, leaving Naruto with nothing but air to hit. Even as he continued to attack, she employed her unusual stepping technique to avoid him with little effort. The woman took advantage of a pause in Naruto's bombardment pattern and hit the crimson sword's hilt, knocking it out of his grip. As his opponent threw a palm blow targeted at his chest, Naruto noticed the fire sword fly out of his peripheral vision. Naruto instantly channeled his magic into the wind sword in his right hand. The sky blue sword exploded with a burst of air, causing the woman to stumble back from the gale force wind. Naruto altered his weight and smashed his left elbow into her raised guard, noting how the woman flinched at the unexpected force he felt in that arm. They separated themselves and began punching each other, deflecting and blocking the other's attack. Naruto twisted his upper body and whirled in a circle, swinging his wind blade out and creating a dense vortex around himself. "Gale Saber," says the narrator. The woman looked around and jumped backward, barely avoiding the strong winds that ripped the ends of her garments. Naruto smirked as he realized he had the upper hand and ran forward to resume his assault. As Naruto approached her, he noticed that she was blazing even brighter while down on one knee. She peered out over her arms and stared angrily at the boy. Starlight Gazer. The light grew brighter and brighter. The light that encircled her body was blasted forth and surrounded the adolescent mage. His eyes widened as he was shot back several meters and through the trees. Erza was taken aback by the tremendous light magic that had so rapidly overwhelmed her mate. She returned her attention to their adversary and dashed forward, activating her re-equip and snatching the fire sword off the ground. Flame Empress armor. The light faded, and the scarlet-haired mage donned new armor. Her chest, legs, and arms were wrapped in dragon-like armor made of deep crimson, black, and orange. Her hair was styled in two ponytails, and she had long, wide wings that stretched down her back. As flames burst around them, Erza swung her sword as fast as she could towards the taller woman. With her scarlet gauntlet, she gripped the flames and shaped them into fierce balls of fire. The woman of light vanished into thin air and reappeared several feet away, dodging the hail of fireballs. She repeated this several times before the fires calmed down and the two women faced each other in their separate fighting positions. The light user was astounded by the talents of these youthful wizards. This girl was resourceful, taking advantage of possessing such a formidable weapon and using it with the best equipment for the most effective assaults. And she has some of the most elegant and cutting swordplay that would put most other men to shame. You're quite amazing for such a young lady. Thank you, Erza said with a nod, without letting go of her overhead sword posture for a second. She remained cool, collected, and entirely focused on the struggle at hand. A genuinely gorgeous, brilliant young woman with enormous potential. And, while he wasn't as collected as the redhead, the whiskered blonde was a formidable fighter. He was stubborn and desperate to deliver a blow on a significantly stronger and more experienced opponent, and this did not dissuade him in the least. And, whereas the female fought with a strong style and form, the boy was unrestrained and formless. He was undeniably tough and persevered in his quest to defeat her. And after all of the battling, she realized why this boy seemed so familiar. That boy, like her and Oji-sama, had latent chakra reserves in his body. Unlike them, he wasn't consciously suppressing his chakra to keep it hidden, but it wasn't always working. It was dormant like a volcano, so powerful, but it had been dormant for so long that it was unlikely to work without assistance. And something was awry with his arm as well. It felt detached but nevertheless radiated a frightening aura. Erza pushed forward, and the blonde woman braced herself for whatever strike she planned next. Before they crossed, Erza moved to her side and enveloped the light woman, attempting to strike the redhead down. The scarlet girl pulled the fire sword over the ground, leaving a path of fire that rose to form a circle of flames. She nodded as she gazed at her work and then up into the tree above her. Naruto took advantage of Erza's opportunity and jumped out of the tree over the woman. He swirled through the air like a windmill, armor concentrated at the tips of his feet. The woman in the center of the fire circle looked up to see the blonde kid approach her. She stretched her arms above her head, bracing herself for his full-body assault. Dual axe charge. Naruto exclaimed as he placed one foot on the ground and swiftly followed with the other. When Naruto's heels collided with the light woman's forearm, the ground beneath them broke and shattered as a result of the conflicting energies. He kicked the outstretched guard, flipped in the air, and landed on the ground. The taller woman's right arm was trembling, and she had a humorously irritated expression on her face. "You little bastard," she snarled through her teeth as Naruto smiled slyly at her. "Isn't she capable of punching him?" Oji-sama warned her that hitting people with her full might was harmful, but she could make an exception now, right? She prepared her attack by chambering it and concentrating her light magic into her fist. "Pollux," she yelled as she twisted her entire body and threw her punch. Naruto felt the broad magic strike coming directly at him and reacted by drawing the black blade from its sheath. The dragon blade deflected the majority of the explosion, but it was still powerful enough to propel Naruto through the air. With a groan, he drew himself to his knees and looked up at the woman. He was about to launch another strike when Erza extended her hand in front of him. Both the whiskered youngster and the blonde light woman were perplexed by the redhead. Erza didn't look back and instead used her requip to return to her base armor and braid. "Enough, Naruto. We have to stop now." "What? What are you talking about, Erza? You can't be serious," Naruto said, leaping to his feet and attempting to argue with his friend. You could tell she wasn't fighting as seriously, Naruto. "Yeah, I know," Naruto exclaimed, raising his free arm in defiance. "She wasn't trying, but that doesn't mean we can just give up like that." Erza returned his gaze and softly grasped his arm. "I know how much this means to you, Naruto, but we started this, we're the ones at fault," she said calmly as she dropped his arm again. "We can't always jump to fighting as the solution." She took a step forward and took a seat across from the tall blonde woman. "I am very sorry we attacked you like that. I understand you don't want to tell us who you were, but please, this is a very important matter for my friend and I want to help him as much as I can. Even if it's only for a little while, will you please listen to our request?" She bowed deeply. The two blondes were taken aback by the girl. She had put herself in danger by attempting to defuse the bomb before it exploded. Naruto examined his behavior via the quilt. Erza was going out of her way to stop the argument and talk to that woman before it got out of hand. And she did it for his sake. He sheathed his weapon and approached his companion, bending his head as deeply as she did. "Please. The light user bent their head politely between the two teenagers and considered what to do. According to Oji-sama, the people who chased them because of their power never stopped fighting for a second. They would never try to bargain in this manner. She stood up slowly after releasing her fighting stance. If they were lying, she would take them out before they made a move. Fine, she said flatly. I'll hear what you have to say. The two fairy mages raised their heads and grinned at her. But I don't have all the answers you're looking for. Come with me. I know who you can ask. Naruto lifted an eyebrow in perplexity. He believed it was feasible, but were there truly more chakra users here? Who? My grandfather. Hashtag hunter The sight of the lonely clearing in the woods perplexed the third master of fairy tale. There was this tiny field, far distant from the big forest and town that surrounded it, that seemed to be occupied by a small group. A modest, man-made wooden cabin sat off to the side. In front of the modest house was a bonfire area where they cooked the food they had found while hunting in the woods. When he looked around, he found several trees had significant scars and even kunai in them. Finally, the woman's bag of supplies was discovered next to a little cot with blankets. He couldn't believe everything was hidden from the rest of the world. This could not have happened by chance. Another person who has a specific skill that could not be taught by the indigenous of this world. Naruto was dragged here by an unknown great force, although there was one gang that had willingly crossed worlds before. But it couldn't possibly be. I suppose this is what happens when I don't set up the separation barrier in time. I wasn't expecting anyone to ever be able to find us like this, least of all you. Makarov heard a tired, aged but strong voice scream out behind him. He cautiously turned around to see the man emerge from his hiding location and into the open. And the elderly fairy tale mage's thoughts went blank. He noticed a tall old man walking forward slowly but without any obvious signs of injury or aging movement. His face was wrinkled, probably even more so than Makarov's. The seemingly unchanging man's young smirk and bright black hair were vanished, replaced by a weary smile and sheet white hair that formed a beard around his chin. A bundle covered in blankets rested in his arms, grasped closely with a protecting shape. It's good to see you again after all this time, Makarov Dono, he smiled, stretching the wrinkles on his face. Hashirama Dono? Makarov exclaimed in astonished astonishment. The older man bowed his head and looked at the younger man sympathetically. You look a lot older. Makarov scoffed at the remark. You're one to talk. You're older than me. He then looked over the man and noticed that, despite being over 100 years old, he didn't appear quite as shriveled as some people. However, you don't quite look it from my point of view. Hashirama laughed so hard that he had to cough. Yes, it's a trait of my family. We don't usually lose out to time in terms of looks, he said to the considerably shorter man. He, you lucky devil, both men chuckled before settling into stillness. It's almost like this could be a dream, right? Hashirama said, staring off into space. Makarov became aware of his situation and looked down with a mournful smile. Yes, I suppose you're right. Hashirama, too, looked down, a regretful smile on his face. All those grand and horrible things that happened years ago. Sometimes I think everything that happened back then was just a dream I made up, and that if I could close my eyes, everything would change back to what it was, Makarov remarked quietly, recalling all the happy and awful memories he had hidden. Hey, the dreams of old geezers like us, huh? Yeah, you're right. They were both utterly silent, with only the rustle of trees and birds in the background. When they looked up again, their eyes were both absurdly large and twitching with tears. You'd believe they were youngsters preparing to cry if it weren't for their white hair and wrinkled skin. Waahhhhhhhhhhh. Hashirama Dono, shouted Makarov, tears streaming down his face. Makarov Dono. They both hugged and wept their eyes out with a loud shout. While it was a lovely moment of reunion for the two old friends, it was an unsettling and disturbing scene to see out of context. The two sobbing males quickly stopped crying and turned over their shoulders to see two youths and a young woman give them a deadpan glare. Come along kids, I don't want to see where this is going, the older woman said, coughing into her fist and turning around on her heel. Okay, X2, Naruto and Erza said coldly, turning around and following. Wait. And Naruto, Erza, it's not what you think. Don't just leave like that, Mahiro. Fa wa hhhhh. A baby's wail sounded out, and Hashirama came to a halt, carefully clutching the small bundle in his arms. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to terrify you, shish. Damn it, Oji-sama. What did I say about being kind with her? The woman, now known as Mahiro, turned around with a stern expression and approached the towering elder. What the hell is going on? Said Naruto and Erza, staring at the unintelligible scene in front of them. Hunter The fairy group was seated on the ground across from the two chakra users, with Naruto and Makarov sitting cross-legged with Erza resting on her knees, and Hashirama sitting Indian style next to him, with Mahiro holding the infant in her arms. He was massaging the back of his neck and chuckling weakly. Well, I guess we sorted out that little misunderstanding. They finally ended up facing each other like this after several minutes of trying to cool down the situation while the baby screamed in her mother's arms. Allow me to properly introduce myself. He coughed into his hand, looking at his three new guests. My name is Hashirama Senju, and I'm an old acquaintance of Makarov Dono from a long time ago. He motioned to the young woman seated next to him. This is my granddaughter, Mahiro Senju. And the small one in her arms is Koyuki, her baby. The older blonde bowed her head softly. It's nice to be formally introduced to you now. Naruto nervously bobbed his head, while Erza didn't appear to register what they were saying, her gaze fixed on the infant the woman cradled in her arm. Nice to meet you, Makarov said cordially. My name is Makarov Dryer, third master of fairy tale. Mahiro's eyes widen in surprise as she realizes this group is none other than a fairy tale team. There wasn't a single person in Fury who didn't know the name of that legendary guild, and she now felt a little guilty for fighting with two of its junior members so vehemently. You've already met my little youngsters here, Naruto scoffed at the elderly man's description. These are. Makarov saw Erza wasn't paying attention to the dialogue, which was unusual for the austere young woman. The redhead girl jumped up in answer, realizing that everyone in the room was staring at her, and embarrassedly waved her arms in front of her. Oh, I'm okay. Really? I was just She struggled to disguise her expression as she returned her focus to Mahiro and her new daughter. Do you want to see her? The Senju lady smiled as she pushed in closer to the armor girl until she was seated right next to her, shocking the scarlet-haired girl. Mahiro adjusted herself and lowered her arms to show the small baby easier. Erza looked down at the newborn that was sleeping in her mother's arms, no longer crying from being startled awake when Master and Hashirama-san were reunited. The little child had a small tuft of dark brown hair on her head. She looked amazing and beautiful, yet fragile and sensitive to her surroundings. Was this how she appeared to her parents? Naruto watched as Erza was completely captivated by the baby nestled into the blanket covering her. This baby, Romeo. Everyone always dropped what they were doing when it came to babies, especially the girls, probably because they were so cute, Naruto couldn't deny. Happy, on the other hand, was not amused by being outperformed in the adorable department. What is her age? Erza inquired, her gaze fixed on the baby, waving a finger over her head to catch her attention. She's about 2 months old, Mahiro said, watching her infant reach out and grasp Erza's finger with her entire hand, chuckling slightly as the redhead let out a small squeak from the innocent action. My name is Erza Scarlet, Erza said hesitantly, looking up from the baby to the older woman. I'm sorry we antagonized you like that earlier. The woman of light simply smiled and waved her apologies away. And I'm Naruto Uzumaki. The whiskered mage observed a little change in expression over the extremely old man's face before he relaxed back into his previous smile. And from the look on your face, you have a question, don't you? Naruto kept his firm glare before slowly nodding. The old Senju elder could tell this kid had some serious conflicting ideas running through his head at the moment, which only made him more interesting, along with the fact he had chakra. Hashirama chuckled. What do you want to ask me? A lot of things. Then, start with the first one that comes to mind. Naruto looked down and considered what question to ask, then looked back up and asked, how do you have chakra? Well, we were born with it, of course. That was not my intention. I mean, how do you have chakra in this world? Well, then, let me ask you something in return. Hashirama moved in place and glanced at the younger man. Where did you get your chakra? Naruto noticed his tone when he voiced his inquiry, as if he didn't need to hear an actual answer because he already knew the outcome. You come from the elemental nations, don't you? Yep, born and raised, the old man said with a wide smile and a nod of his head. I came to this world a long time ago, but I was originally from the elemental nations. He cupped his chin in a little arrogant gesture and chuckled. In fact, I don't usually toot my own horn, but I was the very first Hokage. He cautiously opened one of his eyes to observe the astonished boy's face, but there was no change in his expression. The first Hokage. You know who that is, right? Not a clue. Mahiro and Makarov were trying to soothe the immensely depressed ninja as a dark cloud hovered over his head. I see. Even the new kids have forgotten about me, huh? That's all right. It's not as if it matters. Naruto arched his eyebrows at the bizarre setting in front of him before pointing to the woman seated alongside his childhood friend and saying, "How about you? What type of jutsu was that previously if you couldn't use magic?"
The woman simply gave him a tired, vacant stare before casually extending one hand to cover her baby's face and raising the other in front of her.
A bright light encircled the tip of her fingers and shone so intensely that the entire space was covered in white light. When the light faded, everyone except Mahiro had dazed expressions. Ah. Dang it, Mahiro, can you warn us before you do something like that again? Hashirama rubbed his eyes furiously and let out a lengthy groan. Oh, there are only dots. I apologize, Oji-sama. He just strikes me as a kid who won't believe you unless you show him an example, she said as Erza gave a cute little look of dazed confusion and fixed her eyesight. Makarov was lying on the ground, trying to look down at his hands, and Naruto was stumbling around, waving his arms in front of him. Just because I have chakra doesn't mean I can't use magic.
No, that's not how it's supposed to work. People with chakra aren't supposed to be able to deal with magic correctly, Naruto remarked to the woman he was accusing, as Mahiro clicked her fingers and waved her palm to catch his attention. So how did you get the ability to use it like that? Naruto said, turning around and rubbing the spots out of his eyes until everything around him was a comprehensible haze.
Well, how did you get your magic then, kid? Mahiro arched her eyes at his expert statement in such a hard topic.
Naruto's body stiffened and his gaze lingered over to Erza for a while, the redhead sharing the same uneasy expression on his face, before returning his gaze to the older woman and saying, "It was a gift. Something to help me survive when I really needed it. All right." Mahiro noticed Naruto's wrath after he answered her question and chose to end the conversation there because it appeared to be a sensitive subject for the two teenagers. "I have these abilities because of my parents. My mother, like you and Oji-sama, was born with chakra, and my father could utilize magic. And I could use both when they had me."
Except for the two senju, everyone looked at the woman in awe, unable to believe something like that was possible. Naruto gained his magic through surgery to save his life, but this woman was born with it, and she had these skills for so long. Makarov then recognized another crucial piece of information that had passed him by. So you really are a senju. But that implies. I am the daughter of Uchiha Senju, Mahiro said, nodding her head. Makarov-san, you knew my mother? When he mentioned the powerful comrade from so long ago, the wrinkled old master nodded his head with a faint smile. Yes, when I first met up with Hashirama Dono and his group all those years ago, she was one of the people who came on the exhibition with him. He noticed the pained look on both Hashirama and Mahiro's faces when he mentioned the powerful comrade from so long ago. She and my father passed away several years ago, Hashirama said as she softly cradled Koyuki in her arms. It wasn't anything bad. They were unwell, but they died while sleeping. Peacefully. With the way her mother lived and who was wanting her blood, a quiet death was all she could hope for. Makarov stared between the two Senju clan members and could sympathize with their anguish and loss, lifting his head with a forceful gaze towards the senior ninja, Hashirama Dono. The older man requested the small ferrymaster for his attention, and Makarov looked at him with a steadfast gaze. Can you tell me what happened back then? What came after Tonewa?
After your team saved us from being captured by Sorrento, we tried to find a place where we could open another portal to go home, Hashirama said, looking up at the clouds over their heads. But the initial attack destroyed all of our supplies, and we couldn't stay in the same spot for very long.
Naruto's eyes widened at the mention of Damnation's leader, and he wanted to say something, but a hand from Makarov stopped him before he could. So we traveled all over this country looking for a safe place to return home. But Hashirama's eyes narrowed at the remembrance of his history. Sorrento followed us everywhere we went. We couldn't stay in the same spot for more than a week without fearing being arrested. And as time passed, he became more obsessed. He wasn't attempting to safeguard his empire after a while, he was just aiming to end us. About a year after we arrived, Sorrento cornered us close to a small town, the elder Senju said, shifting in place. And he was carrying a weapon, a gigantic cannon that fired magical power beyond anything I'd ever seen before. It was potent. I might have perished if it had landed cleanly. The older guy was unnerved by the man's extended stare as he looked past the fairy tale wizards as if they weren't even there. I dodged it, and he sighed and massaged his face with his hand. It hit the town. Everything vanished in a puff of smoke in an instant. I tried to dash down there and save them, but I couldn't get there in time. There were numerous men, women, and children, and it was all over in an instant. Erza felt a chill run down her spine at the older man's expression, and Naruto could only swallow the lump in his throat. They had heard so many stories about the tragedy that occurred at Tonwa's destruction, but this was the first time they had ever listened to someone with first-hand experience at Ground Zero. After that, Sorrento lost it. He killed everyone on my team except Yukihira, who managed to flee before he could reach her. And he charged at me to finish the job, but he was hurt by the rubble and nearly killed. Because it was too late to stop him or save the civilians, I couldn't do anything. My squad was gone, his crew had fled, and there was nothing left to save in town. He sighed and looked up. It didn't matter how badly we wanted to go back home. Our expedition team were the only ones who could keep the pathway open for us. It was just Yukiha and I after Tonewa, but we couldn't keep going. I couldn't keep running. If we had stayed out any longer, more and more people would have suffered as a result of our actions. Yukiha went off on her own, fell in love with a new man, and had another daughter. But I knew she never forgave me for separating her from her other children. Mahiro looked away sadly, remembering her mother's smile and the horrible pain she hid behind that smile.
And I stayed in the shadows, making certain that I never disturbed the peace of this world again. I hid in the forest, the mountains, and wherever else I could get away from the rest of the world, never remaining in one location for too long. I employed a barrier jutsu I had to keep myself out of the way of travelers and people when I concealed. I had decided to leave the world alone once more, but then I learned that Sorrento had survived. It wasn't your fault that he started doing what he did, Makarov said, crossing his arms. Because he couldn't bear the weight of his own faults, that man turned into a psychopath. Hashirama Dono, don't blame yourself for what he's done. It isn't that easy, Makarov Dono, Hashirama said with a sorrowful smile and a dark glitter in his eyes.
I came to this globe to assist in the search for a safe haven for my people to flee the conflict. I was certain that this was the ideal of peace to which those who had endured could return. There were no constant battles, no clans fighting for supremacy, no rivalries between neighboring nations over control of their borderlands, nothing. And yet, in less than a year, I wrecked the tranquility of the planet. Perhaps that is the fate for us bred in the battlefield, Hashirama said as he slowly closed his eyes and angled his head back. Mahiro averted her gaze, ashamed and guilty of her failure to console her own grandfather. Makarov and Erza couldn't keep up their appearance without feeling embarrassed. Could they possibly attempt to persuade the man when they had never witnessed such horrors? Did they have the authority? No, it's not. Everyone in the campground turned to stare at the young blonde child who was resting against his hand and fidgeting with the pebbles at his feet.
You aren't cursed to carry the pain of war or anything like that. It's difficult to lose people you love and come back alive, but you shouldn't think you deserve to die because of it. If you make it off the battlefield, that's a miracle you should cherish, not a sin you struggle to bear. You're not a monster for wanting a better life for people in misery, you're just human. That statement caught Hashirama off guard, and it appears that no one else expected him to include such personal thoughts on the subject. With his full attention, the former first Hokage began to assess the boy. Mismatched eyes, whiskered cheeks, he guarded himself like an experienced fighter. He was trying to avoid making eye contact with both him and Mahiro, and despite being rather inactive, his chakra reserves were quite impressive. No, not at all. This weak chakra, it reminded me of something. That wasn't just because he was an Uzumaki. Hashirama shifted his gaze to the blonde teen. What happened to the elemental nations after I left? And do you know what happened to Konohagakure? Naruto's gaze was drawn to Hashirama, and the senju's gaze was drawn to him as well. At the topic he had picked, his left hand gradually tightened into a fist. Erza was hesitant to look at him because he could see the other ninja lady and Gigi both looking at him. She understood how much he despised reliving his life before the tower, but she also realized it was probably the best thing to do at the time. Naruto returned his focus to the ground, not even attempting to glance up at the very old ninja. I recall the countries were at war. Constant war. They were fighting about. I can't remember the reason anymore, but it was enough to start hostilities across the entire nation. What about Konoha? What did Saru do about the war? Hashirama's eyes narrowed in concern.
Negatively, Naruto shook his head. I'm not aware of any Saru, but I do recall two men named Kakashi and Dans from back then. When he heard that old name again, Hashirama's pupils narrowed. Shimura Dans. A fellow student and rival for the Hokage seat with Sarutobi. He was determined, bright, and entirely dedicated to improving Konoha's future. His sole problem was that he was perhaps too committed. When it came to the task, he was willing to go to any length to ensure its success, and he prioritized his mission over the safety of his comrades. He made me and Naruto cringed unconsciously as he gripped his shirt over his belly. My friend kills so many people. Every chance he could take, anything he could do to advance the state of the village's power, he used me as a weapon. And after a few years, the balance of power broke. The next thing I remember was being in a canyon, with so many soldiers killing each other as fast as they could, and then a bunch of these monsters, larger than this forest, started wiping out ninja left and right. A massacre. And then, there was this massive explosion in the center of the valley. I can't remember anything after, it all just went dark and silent. I started fading in and out, seeing these new bastards start a fight with all the nations, and winning. And then, Naruto came to a halt and looked up at the sky, noting that it had begun to darken in color. He looked down and saw Makarov, Mahiro, Hashirama, and Erza all focused on his story. I saw my friend standing over my broken body, fading away into light. All of the fighting had stopped because he had stopped it. He looked down at me, told me that everything was going to be okay, and then he vanished, and when I woke up, I was here. Naruto took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. I don't know what happened to the ninja villages after that. Some of them might have survived, they might have all died, I don't know. I just know the fighting was over after that. Naruto looked solemnly at the wizened old ninja. I'm sorry. Hashirama sighed unhappily and shook his head, attempting to dry his eyes before they began to wet. How long ago was that? 9 years ago. So it was already too late. By this point, they had either begun to re-establish their power or had died out completely. It didn't matter. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't change anything from here. For the first time in a long time, he began to feel guilty about what he had left behind in order to journey here. Tsunade. Nawaki. He had their mother abandon them just so he could complete his purpose. Were they okay? Did they grow up well despite his actions? Thank you, Naruto. I needed to hear what happened back in our world, even if it wasn't anything good, the elderly Senju remarked with a weak grin and a tip of his head towards the young blonde. Naruto bowed his head in acceptance. Thank you for everything you've done for us, Makarov Dono, Hashirama said to the fairy tale master, but I think it's time for you to go back home. Makarov argued, Hashirama Dono, I know you want to help, but I think it's too late. I think it's time this old man just rested out here. Please, Makarov and Mahiro said, seeing the old man resign his remaining time to live alone. After living a life of blaming himself for the agony of so many others for so long, this may have been the only way he thought he could live anymore. Naruto remained silent. Letting the old man alone may have been the wisest option at this moment.
Not like this. You can't. Everyone turned to stare at the scarlet-haired girl who glared defiantly at the elder Senju. I know it hurts, and I can't even begin to comprehend the anguish you've endured, Hashirama-san, but crawling away to die isn't the way to atone for it. If you want to repent for a mistake you think you made, you have to live on and make up for it, not lay down and wait for death. Naruto said. She looked towards her dearest friend for a moment before returning her gaze to the old man. He said he did a lot of horrible things back when he was a child, and even though I don't think he is to blame for them, he is willing to take that burden and make up for it every day by Erza, Naruto said, surprised by Erza's faith in him. She turned her gaze to the elder woman and the infant in her arms. And it's not just you who is affected by this pain. Mahiro-san loves you, her family, so much that she would stay with you until you died, but is that the life you want her to live? Do you want her and her daughter to live on, carrying your burden of pain with them? Because that is a far worse fate than what you have set for yourself.
Everyone was taken aback. I was stunned at how the youthful re-equipped mage had chewed out the old senju as self-punishment. They were also taken aback by her principles of redemption and forgiveness for others. Not only for her best friend, but also for a total stranger. Naruto simply smiled. He didn't expect anything less from her. That was exactly the type of person Erza was.
Makarov smiled and rose to his feet, advancing towards the elderly ninja. Hashirama Dono, no matter how hard we try, we can't make you change your mind, and if you still want to stay here, we'll leave and keep this place a secret for the rest of our lives, but I want you to remember that I once made you an offer years ago.
He smiled as he cautiously reached out an open palm towards the older man. And that offer is good for as long as I'm alive. It's a long and beaten path, but you won't have to walk it alone. Hashirama turned to face the short guy who stood before him, his hand out to assist. Naruto was staring off to the side, a little smirk on his face as he remembered how his master always helped people he trusted. Erza gladly smiled at her master. Mahiro was wiping a tear from one of her own eyes in gratitude for the sweet gesture. And then there's Hashirama. After decades of running away and hiding from people like a hermit. After blaming himself for all of the world's misery and trouble because he had struggled against a guy desperate to capture him. Seeing a man he thought he'd never see again gave him hope. It was overpowering. It was incredible. It was fantastic. So much so that the first Hokage began to sob. Instead of dread, come from delight. Hash 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 hunter hash 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 hash. Gildarts. That frozen dickwad turned my sandwich into a freakin' icicle, again. Natsu yelled to the seasoned mage in command as he flung his ice-covered sandwich over his head. That's only because you burnt my soda into nothing, charcoal nuts, shouted a half-naked Gray as he marched up and pressed his forehead on the dragon slayers. From her seat at the table, Kana shook her head. Gray, please change your clothes. They can wait. This is more important. Kana appeared to be concerned by the announcement. All right, Gray chooses to fight over clothing. This isn't going to end well for us. Gildarts returned his mug to the counter before turning to face the two young men. All right, brats, you ruined each other's meal. What do you want me to do about it? Make him get me a new sandwich, Natsu said, pointing at Gray. Make him get me a new Coke, Gray said as he pointed at Natsu. Deathmatch. Deathmatch, said the spirited little blue cat as he floated over his friend's head. The last man standing wins. Happy. Bad. Lisana grabbed the cat by the tail and yanked him down to the ground, smothered him under her weight so he didn't aggravate the battle any longer. Boys? The young guys asked, as they felt two large loads descend on their heads and plant them on the floor. Will you two pansies quit bitchin'? I'm supposed to be in charge while the old man is away, not the mediator between your stupid slap fights. You're gonna ruin my representative when the geezer comes back and sees you two have wrecked the place. Gildarts sneers. Mira scoffed, shaking her head, too late for that. What's that supposed to mean? Gildarts asked, his brow furrowed. No offense, Gildarts, but in terms of responsible leaders, you're kind of trailing behind a mentally challenged monkey, Mira stated flatly. Gildarts was irritated by that analogy. Alright, what makes you say that? Everyone in the guild exchanged glances before pointing in different directions of the guild in perfect unison. The crash wizard looked about and spotted dozens of man-sized holes in the wooden building's walls. They were all concerned about his stature, height, and physique. Whatever, it just goes to show that I'm willing to help people get into the guild more easily. Sorry Gildarts, but you kind of just sit around drinking beer and wasting the day away, Levy said humbly. And how does that make me any different than the old man? Not by much, but Master doesn't build a new doorway every time he wants to come in, Wakaba continued as he drew a cigarette, causing the entire guild to chuckle at the expense of the S-class mage. Raw. Guild arts. I'm gonna take your spot as master. Natsu shouted as he came out of the earth, Gray already walking back to his food. Anarchy. Anarchy, exclaimed Happy, breaking free from Lisana's clutches. Ah. I see. A mutiny. I knew this day would come soon enough. Gildarts laughed and gently rose from his seat. In what? For the last few days you've been in charge? Mira inquired. But I would never have guessed it would be you, Natsu. He is literally the only person who would compete against Gildarts for the position of interim master, Elfman observed off to the side. Come, Natsu. I shall face your anarchy until the end. Both morons cried and charged at each other, ready for combat. No anarchy, you damn morons. Everyone turned back to the door, missing the opportunity to watch Gildarts fling Natsu over his head and through a wall with one hand for the second time. I'm gone for a few days, and the guild looks like hell's local bar, exclaimed the small guy as he marched inside his guild, Erza and Naruto following close behind. Following them came an elderly guy and a woman carrying a baby. That's your own fault, old man. Why the hell were you gone for so long? Makarov drew Naruto in front of him and said, this is why. Gildarts, Gray, Mira, and the rest of the guild murmured, figures. What the hell, assholes? I was guiding children through a monster-infested forest. Don't make me the bad guy. That's your excuse for everything these days, Kana observed as she sipped her drink. Hey G-san, who are those two? Gray drew the master's attention. Makarov turned to face the elderly man and woman carrying small bags of possessions on their backs. These are a few of our new friends, and they'll be with us for a while. Erza walked in front of them, facing the two ninjas. This is Hidirama Senju-san, an old friend of Master's, and this is his granddaughter, Mahiro Senju-san, and her daughter, Koyuki, the Senju family said as they bowed to the Mages Guild. And they had the entire guild's attention as they stared at them in astonishment. Mahiro repositioned the newborn, who had begun to kick herself awake. Makarov-san, may I please take a seat? Of course you can, young lady, she said gratefully, before strolling over to the bar stool and giving her infant her complete attention. After a few moments, she turned to see a group of young girls approximately Erza's age staring up at her and her child. A young girl with white hair in a ponytail and odd black gothic attire approached and coughed into her palm. Erza said your name was Mahiro, right? The elder woman asked, smiling, and Mira smiled back. Hello. My name is Mira Jane Strauss, and who is this little cutie? This is Koyuki. Honey, want to say hello? She pointed the little blanket-covered infant towards the young adolescent as she peered down at her and cooed childishly. Mira nay. Don't hog her. I want to see her too, Lisana said as she pushed Mira out of the way and stepped in front of the baby. Oh, she's so adorable. Let me see. Let me see. Let me see. Me too. Kana, Levi, Lackey, and every other girl in the guild gathered around the woman and her infant, causing the baby to cry and wail. The sisters began to panic and withdraw, fearful that their incessant cooing had scared the infant girl. There, baby girl, don't be scared. Mahiro began to move her arms. Everyone simply wants to see you. The young woman proceeded to soothe her baby before sensing a new figure appear behind her. A man with shaggy orange hair and a mischievous smile was lounging on the bar counter, staring at the lovely blonde woman. Good day, madam. I couldn't help but notice you could need some assistance with your daughter. She shook her head and smiled. I've got it, thank you. Alright, fine. But I'd like to see more of your caregiving abilities. Such a nice young lady, yet so knowledgeable about hands-on things. The ace's pickup effort was met with groans from the teenage girls. Mahiro laughed. Well, I suppose a proper introduction is in order for such a nice gentleman. She saw Erza walk forward and carefully entrusted the armored girl to Koyuki. She smiled as she turned to face Gildarts.
Her punch slammed into his cheek, taking him completely by surprise and propelling him through the wall and out of the street. The sight of this new woman punching Gildarts in the face left everyone in the guild dumbfounded. And even more startled that she was getting a response.
Hello. My name is Mahiro Senju. Mother of 3, 33 years old. And I'm not fond of gigolos. Mira stared at the woman in surprise. Holy crap. She's ridiculously strong. She treated Erza and me like we were punks. Actually, it's quite unjust. As he jumped behind the bar to prepare himself a drink, Naruto made a note of it. Erza bowed her head in agreement. I'm very sorry, Hashirama said, looking down at Makarov. She's a nice girl, but she doesn't know how to act in public. The third master moaned, exhausted. Irrational, punches people for almost nothing, and causes havoc in my shattered guild. Yes, she appears to be a perfect fit. Natsu popped out of the hole Gildarts had unintentionally dug. Didn't someone just beat up Gildarts? Everyone who was watching the young man pointed to the blonde woman at the bar. Awesome lady, he exclaimed as he ran up to her. You must be extremely powerful. Mahiro smugly smiled and rubbed her nails across her shirt. I'm doing pretty well. You must be some kind of crazy Amazon lady, like Erza, right? In a second, his scalp was palmed, and he was slowly elevated to eye level with the blonde woman, who had a horrible snarl on her face. What exactly was that? Stop, Natsu. Gildart stumbled in through the hole he made when flung by the fist, his eyes hidden under the end of his hair. That woman. She's wonderful. He spoke passionately, his eyes filled with admiration and yearning for the woman. When Mahiro heard the man say that, she froze in panic, dumping Natsu on his buttocks. What the hell is going on? He should be out for a week after I punch him through a wall. He usually doesn't follow the rules that people set out for normal living people. Erza mumbled tiredly, and the majority of the girls nodded in accord. Kana only shook her head and averted her gaze. Please, said Gildarts as she slid in front of her. Let us head off into the sunset together in search of paradise. Stay away from me, you creepy bastard. Mahiro's legs began to flash about in attempt to kick Gildarts in the jaw, but he dodged with perfect elegance. The guild began to cheer for each of them to succeed in their endeavors. Whether it's kicking the guild's strongest mage in the chin or scoring a night with the lovely new lady. As the crash mage continued to chuckle, Hashirama watched as his granddaughter began to chase the man about with incredible prejudice, knocking anything in her path. Despite the devastation and Makarov's instructions to halt, he noted that everyone was smiling and cheering them on as if it were simply a fun brawl. Mahiro seemed livelier than he had seen her act in a long time, despite the fact that she looked like she could tackle a bull right now. Before his eyes began to water again, he grinned and wiped them. He was relieved to be around other people for the first time in years. Instead of the shadows of despair, bask in the sunshine of joy and optimism.
It was fantastic. Hash 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 hunter hash 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 hash. After a long couple of days, Naruto was resting quietly in his bed, hoping to put them behind him. And after all the work of delivering Master Bob's information and visiting with an elderly ninja and his powerful hybrid granddaughter, he thought he was due for a rest. So he curled up on his bed with his pillow and turned off like a light.
A figure crouched closer to the young blonde man as it proceeded slowly towards the side of the bed. Naruto? He said softly, grabbing the boy's shoulder. Get up. The whiskered child grumbled before turning away from the voice and cuddling up even more in his bed. The man grabbed his shoulders and shook him harder, saying, Wake up kid, come on. Naruto grumbled and jerked his head up to face whoever was shaking him awake. He was greeted by the white-haired, wrinkly old visage of the ninja man he had met the day before, who stood over him and said, About time you woke up. Ah. On instinct, Naruto delivered an uppercut into the man's jaw as he twisted out of bed in the opposite direction. He looked up and saw the old man rubbing his chin to relieve the agony. What the hell are you doing in my house, old man? He exclaimed, relieved. I wanted to speak with you privately. Wow, you've got a mean left hook, kid. Naruto looked at his watch and noticed that it was only 4:13 a.m. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. What the hell could you possibly want to discuss that couldn't wait till tomorrow? Naruto was motioned outside to his backyard by Hashirama. He huffed sharply as he pushed himself up and grabbed a shirt from his wardrobe, staring in the direction the elderly man had gone. Naruto came out of his house and noticed the old ninja sitting on a newly formed wooden stump. All right, Gramps, what's this about? He complained and yawned into his hand. For a little while, Hashirama locked his gaze on him. Your friend, the ones you mentioned in your story, wasn't it the Kaibi? Naruto didn't say anything and only stared at the old man. How do you know? I could tell by the shape of your arm. It has the same presence as the 9 T-tails when it is fighting. Dark, powerful, and unyielding. The whiskers on your face also helped. At the mention of the birthmarks on his face, Naruto rubbed them unconsciously. My wife was similar to you. When she had the Kaibi inside of her, she was the Jinchuriki. And if you have it, it suggests she has moved on as well. Hashirama rose from his makeshift bench and began walking around the clearing. During my day, it was a fearsome monster known across the kingdoms as one of 9 capable of turning the world on its head. But the fact that it had begun to lose its rage and actually prevented the fight from developing further. I never expected the Kaibi to alter so drastically. Kurama. Hashirama returned his attention to the youngster after hearing him mutter that name. What? What was it? Naruto gave him a lifeless gaze. It was not Kaibi. Kurama was his name, and I remember all he did and how he fought other people before I was born. I'm not sure if he did it for retribution or because he got tired of witnessing us humans fight each other like morons. But I do know that everyone's assumptions about his being an awful demon beast were incorrect. Hashirama stared at the child in disbelief before considering what he had said. He returned his gaze to Naruto and said, I'm sorry. It's fine, said the young mage, shrugging his shoulders. All that mattered is that I knew what he was truly like. Is that it? He asked, looking around the broad space and early morning sky. Hashirama grinned and returned to the stump where he was seated. He made the snake sign with his hands and the stump began to grow. Naruto jumped back in amazement when he saw the wood structure that had formed next the man, forming a neat and pristine wooden beam. Hashirama put his hand up against it. I've grown weaker since I arrived in Earthland, and it's not just because I'm getting older. You mentioned getting your magic through surgery, correct? So you should understand how magic takes precedence in this world over us with chakra. We don't get along with the nature of this world. He'd become far weaker in his time here than he had in his youth. Mokuton was more difficult to use, and Sage Mode took far too long to activate, making it nearly difficult to use in battle. People with chakra were not designed to function successfully in Earthland. It didn't help that his body couldn't bear the stress of fighting anymore due to his age. Naruto agreed with a nod. When he was harmed, Rob Jichon couldn't heal him with magic since his body rejected magic like a disease. I thought we'd never be able to make it in this world. But when I started looking after Mahiro, I discovered something. The way we use our chakras contradicts with the nature of magic to the point where our bodies rebel. Her body, however, had gotten acclimated to both the chakra in her system and the power she was capable of channeling. It's a mess when they clash. But when they work together, a person can become stronger than they ever imagined. He grinned and brushed up against the tree beam on his side. I want to teach you how to use your chakra. Naruto's eyes widened in shock. What? Are you going to teach me how to make trees?
He shook his head and chuckled. Unfortunately, this is a Hashirama exclusive. But everyone has their own way of wielding power, and I want to help you find yours. Naruto shifted his gaze to the side, thinking for a while before asking himself, what kind of jutsu does Mahiro use? She does not employ any form of jutsu. She didn't learn to shape her chakra into an element or any kind of specific style when she was younger. She does, however, use her chakra to boost her strength to superhuman proportions. She's gotten so excellent at it that it's like second nature to her. So that explains why she hit like a freight train. And you're actually lucky to be learning this late. Hashirama smiled and began going through hand seals as if it were second nature. Most children your age have been hardwired to shape their chakra using hand seals as a catalyst. But you've spent your entire life fantasizing the ability to channel magical power via your body. So, if you could use your chakra without using hand seals, you could build a completely new freestyle jutsu form for yourself.
Naruto stared down at his hands, carefully closing and opening them. And this will make me stronger? He asked, returning his gaze to the old man. How you use it is entirely up to you. But I guarantee to assist you every step of the way. And as an added bonus, he winked, giving the child a huge grin. I'll even teach you a foolproof method of defeating opponents who are stronger than you. Naruto scoffed and shook his head, saying, there is no foolproof method of fighting. Hee. Well, you're right about that, but this will definitely help you along the way. He took a step to the side and rested against the wooden framework. If you want to, all you have to do is start with this board. Naruto smiled as he raised his brow and began going towards the wooden beam. So, what's the deal? When I was a kid, we discovered our individual jutsu affinities by channeling our chakra into our surroundings and watching what happened. It was up to the individual whether the environment would burn or grow moist. So put your hand against the wood, channel your chakra, and let's figure out your style. Naruto smiled and placed his hand against the beam while closing his eyes. He focused his energy, directing it through his hands and into the wood. He drew his hand back gently and nothing. Naruto and Hashirama gazed at it, puzzled, before returning their attention to Naruto's hand. Did you do it right? I'm not sure if I did it correctly. I simply channeled my strength via my palm and into the board as you instructed. Are you certain it was chakra? You might have grown too accustomed to magic to recognize the difference. Naruto reddened and sank into a horse position. Shut up, okay. I can't even remember when I last used chakra. Just give me a minute. Well, then, hurry up. Shut up, old man. Naruto growled fiercely while concentrating on channeling his old chakra. He tried to recall all of Kurama's previous lessons on chakra sculpting and focusing through his hands, but it had been so long that he needed time to catch up. Naruto pressed his fingers against the wood and concentrated on his power. Come on, people. Come on, people. Swish. Naruto opened his eyes and carefully drew back his hand to behold the outcome of his labor, with Hashirama staring on. The side beam was slashed long and deep. Well, I'm curious to see what kind of wind you make, Naruto, the ancient senju grinned. To be continued.
That's it for this podcast. Thanks for listening to this video. I hope you all did enjoy this part of the story, and if you did, like, share, and subscribe for more. And thank you all for helping support, and have a great day.